Ready for this deep dive? We're going to dig into ADP 337.
Yeah, the Army's doctrine on protection. We've got a ton of resources here. Field manuals, strategic documents, the whole 9 yards. And we're going way beyond just, the bullet points. Especially in Chapter 2. Want to see how it actually works in the real world. From peacetime all the way to, the thick of it.
The thing that always gets me about ADP 337, it takes this word protection. Seems so simple, right? But it turns it into this huge complex idea. It's not just like physical security, right? It's about making the Army like a fortress from every angle you can think of.
It's like they say, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? And it feels like ADP 333 is all about like finding and reinforcing every single link. Exactly. And sometimes it's those little things, the ones you might not even think about. They can be the things that if they break, it all falls apart. Think about like the Battle of Stalingrad, World War II, right? The German army. I mean, they were a powerhouse. But what really messed them up, it wasn't just the fighting, it was the logistics, the supply lines, especially with that Russian winter.
Wow. Yeah. Like winter clothing, you wouldn't think it'd be a big deal, but in that situation, it was make or break.
Right, and that's what I mean. The priorities, they change, right? Peacetime, crisis, all-out war. But those core principles, those are always there, no matter what.
Okay, so let's break it down. We've got protection going on at every level.
Right.
Theater army all the way down. What's it look like for, say, a theater army compared to, like, a brigade combat team?
Okay, so picture this. Theater army, they're like the architects. Big picture stuff. Securing ports, keeping those supply lines open, coordinating all those national assets. They're setting the stage.
So, like, the foundation,
Yeah.
before anything else happens.
Exactly. No, zoom in. Core level. They're dealing with the big threats, missiles, cyber attacks, stuff that could disrupt everything. They're like the watchmen, always on the lookout.
Keeping those threats away. So the divisions, the brigades, they can do their jobs.
Right. Now, even closer, division level. They're all about, like, making sure everyone has what they need. Resources, coordinating protection, especially in those close fights.
So the Corps is managing the big picture, and the division is making sure everyone's got the tools and the plan to protect themselves while they're, in the thick of it.
You got it. And then you've got your brigade combat teams, the smaller units. That's where it becomes really personal. Every soldier, doesn't matter what their job is, they've got a part to play in protection.
Yeah.
Maintaining their gear, staying alert, knowing what to do if something seems off.
A real team effort. Everyone's contributing to, like, this overall shield.
Exactly. And that's where this idea operational framework comes in. Deep, close, rear areas, almost like rings of protection.
Okay, break those rings down for me. How do the priorities change as you move through each one?
So look at a map, right?
Yeah.
Core area of operations, deep area, that's where they use intelligence. Disrupt enemy networks, take out those high-value targets, basically stopping the threat before it's a threat.
Whoa, next level stuff.
Right. Then you've got close area, divisions coordinating, maneuvering, protection, reacting to those immediate threats, taking advantage of any opportunity.
This is a lot more like reactive
Yeah.
in the close area.
Yeah. And then finally, you have the rear area. Now, this might seem like the safest spot, but it's super important. Think about it, supply lines, fuel, ammo, medical stuff. If that gets disrupted, it impacts everything.
Yeah, it's like they say, an army marches on its stomach. You can have the best soldiers, but if they're not getting what they need, they're not going to last.
Right, and that shows how connected it all is. Weakness in the rear means vulnerability up front. It's all one big system of protection.
So even in those areas, like logistics, support, it's all critical.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. It's not just for wartime. This whole protection thing, it's huge, even when we're not technically at war.
You mean like peacetime?
Exactly. But we got to be proactive. Security cooperation, deployments, all that, it all needs a plan for protection. Thinking ahead, figuring out the risks, being ready for anything.
I bet in today's world, that's more important than ever, with everything changing so fast.
You got it. These days, threats, they can come out of nowhere. Cyber attacks, fake news, even protests, things can change so fast.
Well, it's like always on your toes, not something you just like turn on when you need it.
You got it. And ADP 333, it really gets into that, especially with force protection. That's all about stopping anyone from messing with, everything the Army needs. People, families, our bases, info, everything's a target, right?
Protecting the whole system.
Right, like building a fortress. You don't just build the walls, right? You gotta have the guards, the supplies, think about everything. Disease, even morale, it all matters.
You're protecting the people inside just as much as the fortress itself.
Exactly. And that's what makes force protection so important. It makes us think about the things you might not see right away. Cyber attacks on logistics, those fake news campaigns, even like going after families back home,
Yeah.
it's messed up.
Families too. That's scary.
It's the reality. Information spreads so fast, one rumor online, a fake news story, it can change everything. Morale, what people think, even what our leaders decide.
Yeah. If they control the story, they control a lot more than that.
Exactly. And that's why force protection is more than just, physical security. It's about controlling the information, fighting back against the lies, and making sure everyone, our soldiers, our communities are strong enough to handle it.
Protecting the mind just as much as the body. I like that.
Right. Strong defense starts with a strong mindset, believing in what we do and being able to take those hits. The mental ones, they can be just as bad as the physical ones, honestly.
That's a good way to put it. It's not just about strong bases, it's about strong minds.
Yes. And that strength, it's super important when we're moving troops, equipment, all that, deploying, that whole thing from getting the orders to actually landing somewhere. There's so many things that could go wrong.
I bet. It's a lot of moving parts. Seems like a lot of chances for the enemy to do something.
Exactly. They could hit our transportation, mess with our supplies, even use cyber to confuse us, slow us down. And we can't forget about our troops and their families. All that stress, being apart, it's tough.
So force protection, it's about taking care of our people as much as our equipment.
100%. Making sure our soldiers have what they need, their families are good, and they feel supported. When our soldiers know their families are safe, they can focus on the mission, no distractions.
Sounds like a massive undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
How does the Army even handle all that?
Well, first thing, force protection isn't one size fits all, right? What we do depends on the situation, the threat, where we are, the mission itself. But basically, it's a team effort, different groups working together.
So it's intelligence, military police, family support, everyone.
Everyone. Each part is important. Intelligence, they figure out the threats, the weak spots, so we can stop them before they happen.
So it's not just reacting, it's getting ahead of the problem.
Yes. And then you've got the physical stuff. Hardening bases, securing our routes, checking everything at ports, airfields.
Taking ourselves a hard target.
You got it. And training. Soldiers have to be ready for anything. IEDs, insider threats, you name it.
Because sometimes the enemy isn't wearing a uniform.
Right. Exactly. So force protection has to look at everything. Conventional, unconventional. We can't let our guard down.
Proactive, vigilant, and adaptable.
Exactly. And never underestimate the enemy. They're always looking for weaknesses. We got to be stronger, protect our own.
And when things get really serious, going from like relative peace to a full-blown crisis, what changes then?
Yeah, crises. They can really sneak up on you. One minute you're, doing a normal training thing, and the next it's like, whoa, everything's different, gotta move.
Definitely. Feels like things could go from 0 to 60 in like seconds.
So how does that change things when it comes to protection, in a crisis?
Well, the basics are still there, but the focus, it definitely changes. Everything speeds up. You got to get people where they need to be fast, secure the area, protect those key assets. It's all about speed.
Being agile, making those quick decisions, and not giving the enemy an inch.
You got it. Like, remember back in '03 when we invaded Iraq? Saddam's forces, they were all over the place, hard to pin down. So we went with a lightning campaign. Hit them hard and fast before they could react.
And that speed, that only worked because we'd already thought about protection, right? Securing the supply lines, controlling the air, protecting our guys from those, unexpected threats.
Exactly. It's a balance. Speed and security. Not easy, especially when things are so unpredictable.
It makes you think. Protection, it's not just about defense. It's about being able to move, take the fight to the enemy, even when things get really crazy. Exactly. And that brings us to the big one. Large-scale combat operations. That's where it all comes together. High stakes, intense fighting, and unfortunately, casualties.
The pressure's on, for sure. How do we even start to think about protection in that environment? What's the most important thing?
It's all about protecting your combat power.
Right.
Every soldier, every tank, every plane, they're invaluable. We can't afford to lose them.
So every decision, every order, it's all about making sure we can keep fighting.
Yes. And that means thinking ahead, anticipating, minimizing risk. We got to be a tough target, physically, mentally.
What does that look like? How do we actually harden ourselves?
Well, it starts with the basics. Camouflage, concealment, deception. Make it hard for the enemy to find us, to hit us, and when they do, we got to be able to take it.
Hmm.
and keep fighting.
Resilience.
Yes, and that comes from training, good equipment, reliable communication, and we can't forget about those other threats: cyber, electronic warfare, information operations. We got to be ready for all of it.
Hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
100%. In large-scale combat, that preparation, that's the difference between winning and losing.
It all seems so complicated. So many things happening at once. What are some of the tools, the strategies the Army uses to, like, make sense of it all and make sure that protection is built into everything we do?
That's where those operations and tasks that enable protection come in. It's about putting protection into action. So, for example, you've got security operations, area security, cover, guard, screen. Sounds kind of jargony, I know. But it's about creating layers of defense, like a bubble around our forces.
A defense in depth. I've heard that before. You're not just
Mhm.
relying on one thing, right? You've got backups, multiple layers.
Exactly. And within those layers, there's a lot going on. Countermobility, for one. Using obstacles, natural or man-made, to slow the enemy down. Mining a road, setting up roadblocks, blowing up a bridge. Whatever it takes.
So if you can, like, control the battlefield, make the enemy fight on your terms, that's huge.
Huge advantage. And then there's tactical deception. Trying to outsmart the enemy, making them think we're somewhere we're not, making them guess at our strengths and weaknesses.
Ooh, that's sneaky. But that involves all sorts of things. Camouflage, decoys, maybe even cyber stuff.
You got it. It's about creating confusion, making them hesitate,
Mm.
and then we use that hesitation.
I bet in a real fight, being unpredictable like that could be the difference maker.
For sure. And none of it works without good intel. Knowing where the enemy is, what they can do, what they're planning, that's critical.
It's like know your enemy and know yourself, right? That's what intelligence gives us.
Exactly. And on a more micro level, combat identification, making sure we're hitting the right targets, and fratricide avoidance, which sadly is even more important when things get chaotic.
I bet that's even harder these days.
Yeah.
Everything's so fast, so much technology, easy to get things mixed up.
You're right. Clear communication, fire discipline, knowing what's going on around you, those are essential.
Wow.
We need everyone and everything working together to prevent those kinds of tragedies.
It's about having that shared understanding of the battlefield so we don't accidentally hurt our own people.
100%. And that's true whether we're talking about ground troops, air support, even cyber. A case of mistaken identity in any of those areas, it can be disastrous.
It's like those core principles of protection, they never change. But how we apply them, it's always evolving, just like the battlefield itself.
Exactly. And a big part of that evolution, it's realizing that protection doesn't stop when the fighting does. In fact, it's just as important, maybe even more so, in those stability operations after a conflict.
Let's talk about that transition then.
Yeah.
From combat to stability operations. It seems like a completely different world. What are some of the unique challenges of maintaining security and stability after a conflict?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is simply the change in mindset. You're going from a very kinetic, high-intensity environment to one that's more about rebuilding, reconciliation, and creating the conditions for lasting peace. And that requires a different approach to security.
So it's less about like kicking down doors and more about like building trust in relationships.
Precisely. In a stability operation, your most powerful weapons are often your words, your actions, and your ability to build rapport with the local population. You have to be seen as a legitimate and trustworthy partner, not an occupier force.
That's a tough needle to thread, especially if there's still like resentment or mistrust lingering from the conflict itself.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance. You have to be able to provide security, but you also have to be careful not to appear heavy-handed or overbearing. You have to be able to engage with the local population, listen to their concerns, and involve them in the process of rebuilding their own communities.
So it's about empowering them, not just policing them.
Exactly. It's about building their capacity to provide their own security so we can eventually transition out and leave them with a more stable and peaceful future. And that takes time, patience, and a deep understanding of the local culture and context.
It sounds like those stability operations, while maybe not as, action-packed as a large-scale combat operation, come with their own unique set of challenges and complexities.
Absolutely. In many ways, they can be even more challenging because you're dealing with a wider range of actors, a more fluid and uncertain environment, and often a lot less clarity about who the good guys and bad guys really are.
It's like that old saying, war is simple, but peace is very complicated.
That's a great way to put it. In war, you have a clear objective: defeat the enemy. But in peace, the objectives are often much more nuanced, much more long-term, and much harder to define, let alone achieve.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. It's amazing how ADP 337 really does cover the whole spectrum, from peacetime to crisis to all-out war, and then back again to those post-conflict operations.
Absolutely. Protection is an all-the-time thing, and it takes all of us working together to make it a reality.
Well said. And for our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How does this concept of protection resonate with your own experiences in the Army? What are some of the challenges and rewards of building and maintaining that culture of protection within your units? Join the conversation online, and let's keep the discussion going.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about this important topic.
Until next time, stay safe out there.